everyone. I'm Dr. Casey Brimmer, artist, activist, and educator with almost 20 years of community education experience on identity-based issues like gender and sexuality, and more than 10 years of classroom education experience.
And I am Bob. I am a pastor and an ally and a person who loves a number of LGBTQ people very dearly. And fortunate to be asked to be part of this podcast. So,
Awesome. Let's get started. So today's episode is kind of about the question zone, how to ask questions with less harm, and to minimize the risk of harm. This is the Affirming Practice Podcast. This space is for you if you are caring enough to try, to keep trying, to be willing to be wrong or to be bad at something, to be corrected on occasion, varying degrees of gentleness, and knowing that trying makes a difference. If those apply to you, then this space is for you. So last episode, we discussed how to decide if and when to ask identity-based questions. We looked at context, common sense, and kind curiosity. Today, we're discussing a little bit of where to ask questions and how to ask while minimizing risks for causing harm when we do ask questions. But also, what do we do if we make a mistake? If a question is Googleable, if it's searchable, search the thing. Um, so what is non-binary? Search the thing versus if it's kind of a question about my experience as a non-binary person, you might ask, okay, Casey, what does non-binary mean to you? So I might ask Bob, what does being a man mean to you? Versus what is a man? I think starting here with like some samples of what questions we've asked that we want to know, and maybe discussing like what's a searchable question versus what is an ask a human question.
mhm.
Um, so I guess what questions have you started with? Like I know I was asked what is I was asked what is non-binary by my mother, and I told her to Google. And I did get a little nervous because I didn't Google first, but that's a different story. Um, or my dad asking, you said you're non-binary. What is binary?
Mhm.
Right? So what questions have you sort of started with? So whatever comes to your mind that we can say, okay, is that a person question or a search engine question?
Well, I mean, one question that I had was, for instance, the first time somebody uh, told me that they identified as non-binary and lesbian, I was like, I like I couldn't figure out because to me, gay or lesbian sort of implies a binary, and I couldn't figure out how to like square the circle on that. Um, I think now that would probably be a Googleable question, unless I was asking them, well, what does that mean for you specifically? So that was one.
I think the intersections of identity are those are going to be even more personal than just like, okay, what is non-binary is different than what does it mean to you, as we've said, but also some people don't believe you can be a non-binary lesbian. I believe it because I am one. Those are questions about experience, right? That difference. Last episode, we talked a little bit about asking people their pronouns. I can't Google what are Bob Ierien's pronouns. I mean, I might be able to. They might be able to surmise that from the interwebs, but it'd be better for me to say, hey, Bob, what pronouns do you use? Just so I know I'm treating you with respect, right?
Right.
That's more of a interpersonal question versus a technological question.
Hmm. I think in general, a question that is about a person's individual experience is a
Yeah.
question to ask that person. Again, assuming that it's a question that's any of your business and that you're asking from an appropriate place and those kinds of things. Whereas a question that is the way that I explain it to the cishet people that I hang out with who want to do this well but don't always know how is don't expect LGBTQIA plus people to do all of the labor of your education. If you can educate yourself in some other way without putting that burden on a member of the community, then do that. Um,
Yes.
if it's if it's a question that you may not be able to answer in that way. So, for instance, asking the question about what does non-binary mean or whatever is one that can be Googled. A question that's more sort of context specific. What is it like to be a non-binary person in Lancaster, Pennsylvania in 2026? In what
Yeah.
ways is that scary? In what ways is that comfortable? In what ways is that easy or hard? That's a different, that's a kind of question that you might need to ask somebody who has that personal experience rather than trying to Google it and, because AI will try to answer that for you from Yelp reviews, but I don't know how helpful that is.
Yeah. AI is not going to get the nuances here.
Right.
Uh, so if your question is searchable, try your library, try Google, try Bing, try Yahoo. There's questions to ask that like logistical questions, technical questions like what does non-binary mean? What do the colors on the non-binary pride flag or the progress pride flag mean? Right? Those are questions we can Google and get relatively reliable answers. The It's important to note that what does non-binary mean means something different today to me than and in my particular context than it means to someone else. And that's because it's a social construction, which we're going to get to an episode about social constructs, but that is not today. Versus if your question is about connection. So, how does your non-binary identity influence your art? Or how can I best support you in our workplace, like this specific context? So we're looking going back to looking at context. If you want to know about someone's experience within a context, within the context of themselves even, then that's probably when you ask the person. But
Right.
you wouldn't, going back to last episode, you wouldn't ask me, well, Casey Ann, how do lesbians have sex? One, that's Googleable, and two, common sense, it ain't none of your business.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, my brain just flashed to like the Google results from that search, and no.
I learned the hard way to not tell someone to Google something unless you've Googled it first. But
Yes.
I really do love the website. Let me Google that for you.
Yes. I love that thing.
That's so beautiful. If you don't know what that is, here's an Easter egg. Go find it. It's hilarious. So, connection questions are questions about personal experience that require having a mutual desire to build a relationship, right? So you either have the desire to build a relationship, you have a relationship, or you're trying to build it, whether that's a friendship or something else. These are questions you might ask someone as you're getting to know them.
As opposed to, something you would just ask a random stranger that you just met. Like, oh, I see you're wearing a pride pin. Let me ask you this off the
Very
wall
deep
question about
person.
your experience as a member of the community. No,
Yeah,
no, 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 no.
yeah, because we don't want to tokenize people either. So elaborating that tokenization is taking one person who might be part of a community and using their experience to explain how everyone experiences that community.
Right.
It doesn't work like that. There are some questions we want to ask pretty much everyone. Things like, what name do you use? What pronouns do you use? And we're going to keep coming back to that because it's a good example of context, common sense, and kind curiosity. The why are we asking the questions?
Getting to know people questions, pronoun questions, those kinds of things make sense. And some questions, are best reserved for people that you know really well. And some questions are
Yeah.
best reserved for no, don't ask some human being that.
So the risk of harm is kind of inevitable, and we've talked about this previously as well, where you don't want to ask a singular person what their pronouns are in a room full of people if that risks outing them to an entire community. We need to assess what the risks of harm are for ourselves as we're engaging with others, but also, and perhaps as allies, more importantly, for others as we're engaging with others. So that risk is a little bit inevitable.
Mhm,
Um, you don't know what someone has been through in their lifetime or what they are been through that day
mhm,
or what they are actively going through right now. You could be the 10th person this week to ask something, and that can be exhausting if they haven't volunteered to answer those kinds of questions. So, if, especially if it's something you can search, ask the technology before you ask the human. If it's about their personal experience, it's a different story.
mhm.
In regards to risk of harm, that's not just for LGBT plus, like Q plus people. In this episode, we discuss risk of harms when asking questions and how to self correct or accept correction from others. And the guidelines that we offer in the vein of allyship to LGBT people may also be used to address risk of harm intended and unintended towards other marginalized groups such as the disabled community or for people of color or um, for people who are different than you. And our examples are not the end all be all, and we acknowledge we will miss certain things in this episode, but I think together we hope to come back to those in future episodes. And that's also to say, we're not going to be able to cover everything.
Right.
Some things are outside of our scope of expertise.
And there will also be, situations that we just simply can't possibly think of every possible example. Um, and for that matter, there are, in terms of risk of harm, somebody might have something in their background or their past that a particular question asked in a particular way can trigger some things for them that you would have no idea of beforehand. And so some of it is a matter of just recognizing that we're all going to sort of step on our own tongue now and then and get it wrong. We try to minimize that as much as we can by remembering things like, kind curiosity and context and approaching these things carefully, um, but also um, recognizing that sometimes it's helpful to ask the question, may I ask this question? May I ask you a question about your identity? Um, and sometimes the answer to that will be sure, and sometimes the answer to that will be no, and sometimes the answer to that will be yes, but not right now, because right this moment I just don't have the spoons.
And asking, can I ask this question? Or can I ask you a question about your identity? You have every, like, making clear that people can say no
Yes.
is very important. And also, like you said, not right now. Or someone might say, well, that depends on what the question is. I'll hear the question and then determine whether or not I feel like answering that at this moment or at all. And we, like I said, cannot answer for everybody. We cannot assume we know what all the risks are. I want to be clear about what we mean by risk of harm. And that's regardless of our intentions, our questions or engagements with others may cause harm because we don't know their circumstances. And so there are certain things that we need to consider in terms of risk of harm with identity-based questions. The how and the why we're asking makes a difference. See episode 1 on context, common sense, and curiosity. But also, microaggressions exist. So, microaggressions in general are verbal or behavioral slights that communicate biases, if not hostile views, about a person or a group of people. And these are things that we may not realize are problematic because we've been raised with them and now we're being introduced to new kinds of people, or we've always known these kinds of people, but we didn't know that this was a problem because no one ever told us. Things like that's so gay, when gay means that's a bad thing. Asking someone if maybe they haven't met the right person of the opposite sex, quote, or is their LGBTQ identity a phase? One, phases are beautiful things, and just because something is a phase does not mean it was not real when it was happening or is not real in this moment. Assuming heterosexuality, like asking a woman where her husband is.
Mm-hmm.
You don't look trans is not actually a compliment.
The phrase that I used to hear a lot, and I'm now sorry to admit used to use a lot of, when someone was being cowardly, particularly with respect to like moral cowardice, the sort of go-to phrase of, grow a pair of balls. Like,
Man up.
yeah,
Do you want to
exactly.
hear a hilarious story?
Uh, Always.
I tell myself to man up to go into the women's room. What even is that?
Don't ask me.
It's the biases we've been taught.
Well, right. And recognizing that spine is probably a better anatomical feature to use than balls, but yeah, they are phrases that we grew up with, culture that we've been taught, the and they're just a phrase that sort of rolls off the tongue in a lot of cases. And until somebody points out to us why it's problematic, we may not even think about what it literally means,
Yeah.
right?
And if someone points out that something is problematic, you need to do the analysis for yourself of if that's something you want to keep using, and if it is, why. Because something that's problematic to me isn't going to be problematic to another person of similar identities, like inherently. But if it's an identity that I don't own, it's not mine, and I do something that's messed up, I don't care how I feel about it if someone else says, hey, that's a problem.
If somebody tells me that something is problematic for them or that something that has been said or done is offensive for them, I need to pay attention to that. And then I need to do some evaluating in terms of context, and what was said. And because there are times when something can be said that, you know what, if that was offensive for you, that is a you thing, not a me thing. So, so to give an example, say a church takes a public stand and says, homophobia is a sin, hate has no home here. And someone is very offended by that. Okay, if you're offended by the statement that hate is not welcome here, you need to ask yourself why that bothers you. Like, oh, and you know, because you can, and I have certainly seen people um, attempt to use assertions of harm or assertions of offense as a way of holding the culture hostage, right? Um,
Yeah.
you know, I'm offended to be called cisgender. Well, I'm sorry, but technically that's you are cisgender, right? Or,
Yeah.
I'm offended to be called heterosexual when I am heterosexual. Well, people will try to use that as a way of like derailing the conversation. And no, uh, so like you
Yeah.
said, when somebody tells me that something that I'm using is problematic for them, I still got to do a little bit of digging there and do a little bit of thinking and what have you. And obviously, if it is a legit expression of, hey, that language has been used and weaponized against me and people like me for a long time, then I'm going to pay attention to that and say, I'm sorry, I'm going to not use that language anymore. Right. Um, on the other hand, if it's a case of somebody operating in bad faith and just trying to use that, to get their way, not necessarily, no.
Yeah. So what I'm thinking about is also things that are really easily fixed.
Yeah.
I think we were talking about it in live this week or last week about you guys
Mm-hmm.
and going into a space where guys is like people try to use it gender neutrally. Well, instead of saying, hey, you guys, to a group of people of mixed genders or unknown genders, hi, y'all. Y'all means all.
Mm-hmm.
It's fully inclusive of all the genders.
Right.
It's an easy, yes, you might have to practice and retrain your brain, but it's an easy fix to alleviate harm.
Right.
Um, and is that harm inherent to every conversation? No, but you don't necessarily know everybody in every group that you might go up to and say, "Hey, you guys." Um, but if I go in and say, "Hey, y'all, how y'all doing?" Um, well, up here in Massachusetts, I get funny looks anyway. They,
Right.
y'all is going to be a thing here. I'm adamant. I want to look at some of the other microaggressions that
Mm-hmm.
this conversation kind of applies to. And it's things you may not realize are problematic because you weren't told they were problematic. So things like assuming all disabled people are asexual. I've seen this a lot, especially with autistics.
Mm-hmm.
Sexuality is a thing. There's a really good play that you can watch on YouTube called Aught is Love by Nathan C. Love. And it is so good. And it tells Nathan's love story as someone who is autistic, but also assuming disabled people are not able to marry, not able to have kids. Speaking to a caregiver instead of the disabled person themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Saw this recently and I didn't say anything in the moment because I didn't want to be that person. But the term wheelchair bound instead of wheelchair user, because wheelchair bound implies that a wheelchair doesn't give us freedom.
Mm-hmm.
I use a wheelchair, it is a tool. Um, I use hobble sticks. I call them hobble sticks. I use crutches or canes. I call them hobble sticks because I use them to hobble, but I can use them to hobble you. Y'all, my comedy is a little bit dark sometimes.
A little.
Um,
Sometimes.
Hush now. Um, but it's also things like hypersexualizing women of color.
Mhm.
And that's something we may not have been explicitly taught through conversations with our families, but it is something that we are shown in media.
Mhm.
All of these things are things we are shown in media because
Right.
we don't provide whole person representation most of the time. And again, we're going to get to an episode on representation eventually. But the last example I have here is commenting on people of color's hair or touching a person of color's hair or asking to do so outside of your line of work. One, don't mess with people's hair, period. But as a white person, 1000% not my lane. Stay the hell
Right.
out, right? And one of the risks of microaggressions is not knowing what you don't know. If you don't know something is problematic, you're more likely to say or do the thing thinking it's okay. And this means you could be corrected or even yelled at. You can't and shouldn't stop interacting with people who are different from you because of the risk of being wrong, but you should know how to accept that correction.
Yes.
Um, do you want to talk about impact versus intention for a minute?
Sure. So, um, I may say something with all the goodwill in the world, but the way that I say it may be problematic. It may be a thing that belittles or dehumanizes without me even realizing it because I don't live in that experience, right? I don't live in the experience of, for instance, a non binary person of color. And so I may say something with all the goodwill and love in my heart in the world and no desire whatsoever to dehumanize that person. But what I said is problematic. Intent matters, but impact also matters. And so if they tell me that whatever my intent was, the impact is problematic, then I need to stop doing that thing, right?
Yeah.
That's a correction that I need to take on board and say, oh, if my intent really is to not be harmful, and somebody tells me that the thing I intended to be non harmful actually is harmful, then it's not rocket science to figure out stop doing that thing, right?
Yeah.
Um, if instead my intent is to get my way, my intent is to be, the expert, my intent is to be, hey, I'm going to do it my way and you're just going to have to get over it, then my intent is not to be non harmful anymore. Um, so it's a matter of when my intent really is to be non harmful, then that kind of correction is actually a good thing. And I find myself thanking people and saying, thank you for telling me. I did not realize that that thing that I was saying was problematic. I appreciate
Yeah.
that. And I think there have even been times when you've taught me some things and that I've tried to modify and correct. And I'm grateful for that because, again, I don't want to be, roaring through the world like a tornado, destroying people, or even, just generally causing harm of any kind, right? Like
Yeah.
if I say the wrong thing, it may not destroy somebody, but why would I want to even cause somebody a few seconds of pain if I can avoid it by simply changing my speech?
The comparison that folks use to describe this is if I'm, say, walking through a movie theater and I've got to get to my seat and I step on someone's toe and I hurt them, I didn't intend to step on their toe, but I still caused harm. So it's important there as for me to say, hey, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cause harm. Like in that case, that example fell short because it doesn't talk about how we proceed to not do the thing. Apologies are not just words, they're followed by action. And I see this a lot with misgendering, where thinking back to when I was in Iowa, I had a faculty member who I was working with outside of the classroom and they kept misgendering me and they'd be corrected. So it'd be like, oh, that's Casey Ann. she's doing blah blah blah, and someone would be like, actually, they, and the next sentence, well, she, next sentence, like after being corrected over and over again. And so the fact that in the middle of those misgenderings, the individual apologized means nothing if they don't change the behavior.
Right. And this is to draw in another sort of experience that I have some familiarity with. This is why the 12-step communities talk about making amends, not making apologies, because making amends means amending our behavior. It's changing something, right? It's, yes, it's recognizing we have done harm. It's apologizing for the harm that we have done, and it is making some concrete changes, some taking some steps to try to heal whatever harm we have done and not keep doing that. Um,
Yeah. Um, and there's another part to this. Apologizing isn't easy, but there's a right and wrong way to do it as well, and not just the action behind it. So I want to provide an example, and I want you to correct me during this example. Okay. Bob is an absolutely wonderful person. They're a pastor at a church in Pennsylvania.
I prefer he, him.
Oh, I'm so sorry. You know, I'm trying. I always try to get it right, and I keep messing up, and I'm so sorry. I'm a horrible person.
No.
No. Okay, but what is the no?
The no is, well, one, you're not a horrible person if in good faith just got it wrong. But the other thing is, like, that whole apology made the whole thing about you, not about the pronouns and the person that was actually theoretically harmed.
Yeah, and it draws attention to the thing, right? It makes the focus not only on me, and you feel bad and you have to tell me I'm not a horrible person. It also draws out this mistake, right? So if I misgender you and you correct me and I say, "Oh, I'm sorry, you're right. He is a pastor in Pennsylvania." That's a whole different story. We can move on. How you apologize matters.
And,
Uh,
and as somebody who has sort of done this both ways, like I've made the, like, very quick self-correction, I'm sorry, I meant to say so and so, and moved on, and someone who has also done the whole, oh my God, I'm so embarrassed, I'm horrified that I have misgendered you, etc. I know that for me, that was usually coming from a really good intent of, like, I really want to get this right. Like, I'm trying really hard to get this right, and I'm frustrated with myself that I didn't, but it's still making it about me when I drag that out instead of just saying they, them, and move on, instead of,
yeah,
flogging the dead horse.
yeah. And we just provided a sample of what it looks like if someone else corrects you,
Mhm.
right? And it can look like that a little bit if you're self-correcting, and you're kind of getting it wrong, but there's also they, sorry, I my bad. He is a great person.
Mhm.
That's a whole different story. The conversation moves along a lot quicker. It doesn't draw attention to the harm. And if necessary, you can come up to me and say, actually, what you said really caused harm. Here's how. Or what you said caused harm. I don't owe you a how or a why. Can you please work harder to fix this?
Mhm.
Um, the short, quick, gets the job done, does not linger on it, doesn't put the onus on the person who is being harmed to comfort you.
Right.
They owe you no comfort.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so this week's kind of put it into practice is related to the idea of pronouns and stuff like that. There is a website called Pronoun Dressing Room, and if you Google that, it'll come up. But it lets you practice different pronouns and different names. Um, in a way, it gives you something to read, right? I want you to practice using someone's pronouns, even if they're the pronouns you've always used for that person. Practicing pronouns, one, it helps us get it right in the moment, but it also, I'll use the example of my brother. My brother is one of very few family members who actively tries to get my pronouns right. And I know part of this is he has put it into practice with other people. He has applied it and tries. So whether you know someone who's in the LGBT community or not, maybe you can pick a celebrity like Caitlyn Jenner, someone who you know by one thing you want to use for another, or someone's married name, some example like this. I want you to practice it. And I'd love for you to come back and leave it in the comments and tell us how practicing goes for you.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So we've talked about minimizing risk of harm, what to do if you have caused harm. Are we missing? Can you think of anything we're missing or anything you want to add?
Just, I think something that members of the LGBTQ plus community have taught me, um, and you're one of the people who has taught me this, is we all screw up sometimes, right? We all make mistakes, and we do it with cis het people too. We just don't always notice it or know it. And the idea is not to like flog ourselves mercilessly for every mistake we make, but also to not act like it's not a big deal, because it kind of is a big deal. But, sort of right size the response. Okay, I screwed up there. I'm going to try to do better. And, and if somebody tells you that something you have said or done was harmful, like take that seriously, pay attention to it. And if your genuine intent is to not be a jerk in the world, um, then, you know, respond accordingly. Um,
Yeah. I
it,
want to add that as a non binary person, if you are trying, most of the time, as long as I see you trying, I understand sometimes mistakes are going to be made.
mhm,
But if you aren't even bothering to try,
mhm,
or worse, you are actively, intentionally misgendering,
mhm.
that causes harm, significant harm. Accidentally doing it can cause harm. Some days I just cannot handle that. But most of the time, if you're trying, that's what matters. Show the people you care about, the people you want to be an ally to, that you care by trying, by practicing outside of the space and outside of their context. Um,
Exactly. And
Trying makes a difference.
yeah, and that really is what it comes down to, is do you really give a shit or not? You
Yeah,
know, if you say you care about this person, then you care enough to work at this.
yeah,
If you if you don't care enough to, spend half an hour reading through a script for yourself to work on their pronouns, like when you're not actually in an interaction with them, then how much do you really care about them? Like, I know a lot of people, and most of them I at least care enough about to invest half an hour in. And,
yeah,
you know, um, like it really is about making the effort. And and having our actions align with our words. It's so easy for people to say, oh, well, I'm an ally, or to say, oh, well, I'm not a homophobe, or I'm not transphobic, or, I'm fine with all people, or, I love, this is my pet peeve with churches, all are welcome. Okay. Well, okay. If all are welcome, then are you going to really do the things that make people welcome?
Yeah.
Um, I was once in a church that said all are welcome, and one of the people who was coming to the meeting that we were coming to, and they had big signs out all around their church that said all are welcome here. And one of the people who was coming was a wheelchair user, and the only way for her to get into the building was to go all the way around the back of the building and use a concrete ramp up into the back of the building. And it was winter in the snow belt, and the concrete ramp hadn't been shoveled when all of the sidewalks were shoveled and salted. And so, are all really welcome, or just all who can walk welcome? Right?
Yeah. That's a great example. And is
Um,
it an example of a microaggression too, to not have to think about it?
right. And that's the other thing is I am sure that it was just it I don't think anybody went out of their way to make her feel unwelcome as a wheelchair user. But that was the impact. Intent matters, yes, but impact also matters. Um, I'm a person in recovery, right? I've been sober for a little over 16 years. And for a long time, I would go to church events, whether they were social events with church colleagues, or even like official, like even big church worship services where um, alcohol played a central role, and saying, "Hey, it would be really nice if you would offer grape juice for communion." And there were people who were so invested in the symbol of wine for communion that it took like years to get them to understand no, de alcoholized wine is still dangerous for people who have a problem with alcohol. And it's not just people in recovery, it can be people who are allergic. And social events where the only beverages that were provided were alcoholic beverages, and they just assumed that, well, if you didn't want to drink alcohol, you would bring it yourself. Okay, I feel welcome.
I'm going to let you do your closing line before I do mine. So leave them with what you will.
Folks, please remember this week that you matter, you are valid, you are precious, and above all, that you are indeed deeply and profoundly loved.
This has been the Affirming Practice Podcast, and I'm leaving you with the knowledge to take care of yourself because you are far too important not to. Thank you for being here and for having the courage it takes to explore this. I appreciate you, and we'll see you next time on the Affirming Practice Podcast. Yeah. I love that in my notes, I've got some questions we want to ask everyone. Asterisk. I have no clue why I put an asterisk. That's the current issue, and I know it's something to do with context. Um, we'll move on and see if we come back.
Okay.
Um,